Advent, as you've already heard, is a season of waiting. It's a season of putting ourselves back in the position of the Old Testament faithful who waited for the promise of the Messiah. And our text today, Jeremiah 33, is just that kind of promise, written almost 600 years before Jesus was born. Promises always make me think of being a child at home, and one of the promises my dad would just sort of unexpectedly give to me came to mind this week, probably because tomorrow is my dad's 76th birthday. It's been a very good year for our family, particularly with respect to my dad. He survived open heart surgery and replacement of an aortic valve, which was very touchy, very concerning, and it took a while before they could get him scheduled for the surgery. He's doing well, wasn't feeling well like 2 weeks ago, so they took him in, and they removed his gallbladder because they had an issue there. I'm like, Dad, you're like an old used car. They're just pulling parts out of you, you know? Like, I don't know if you need that anymore, but it's gone now, so too late. But yeah, so we're really, really grateful. But it's got me thinking about my dad with his birthday tomorrow. When I was a boy, one of my favorite things would be when Dad would surprise me. I'm dreaming of summertime as well. When Dad would surprise me growing up in Detroit, and he would say, hey, we're going to go to the Tigers baseball game. And I just could not wait to go to the old Tiger Stadium to watch a game. And he would say, like, okay, got to go to work. Today's the day. Got to go to work. But I'm going to come home from work, and then I'll get you. We'll go get some pizza, and then we'll go down to the stadium. We'll watch the game, and we'll have ice cream at the game. And like that was like the best thing. Except, what was the except? What was wrong with this whole thing? Can you guess? Imagine a 10-year-old boy being told those things. Yeah, the worst part was, why can't we do that right now? And that really is the paradox of promises, is it not? This contradiction that is inherent in every promise. On the one hand, a promise holds out hope of something better. We're going to get ice cream. Awesome, right? But the paradox of the promise is that it is at the very same time underscoring the reality of your current situation. Not ice cream. Ice cream, not ice cream. Baseball game, go to school, right? And as a 10-year-old, I mean, that's awful, like to have to wait. My wife and I, when we do Thanksgiving dinner, we do ham, not turkey. We decided a few years ago, no, nobody likes turkey in our family, so why do turkey? So we do ham, not turkey. But we also eat at noon, because for some reason growing up, my parents and their parents always had Thanksgiving dinner at like 3 in the afternoon. Like, who's eating at 3 in the afternoon? Why are we doing this to ourselves? So we're like, well, we're not going to do that. We didn't want to wait, right? So Thanksgiving dinner was like, don't have lunch. We're going to Thanksgiving dinner. Like, why can't we have it now? So we just decided to move it. But it is the paradox of promises, and it's kind of funny when you talk about a kid, or you talk about waiting for a meal, or, boy, I can't wait to go home and have leftover apple pie, or whatever, right? I've got you thinking about food, and I've lost you for the rest of the message. But that paradox of promises, that it holds out hope of something better while underscoring just how bad things are right now, is frankly a paradox we live in on a global scale right now. I read this morning in the paper that the Syrian civil war, which I thought was over and had been over for like 3 years, turns out it's not over. And the city of Aleppo changed hands again from rebel attacks, and the government lost the city faster than it took to take the city back in 2016. And it's like, oh my goodness, like all eyes on Gaza, Ukraine, and now Syria. And we come into a season like this, and this is where I say, like, it's one thing to think of it like as a 10-year-old waiting to go to a baseball game. That's kind of comical, fine. But it's another thing when the promises of this worldwide universal peace are held out over us. On the one hand, it holds out the hope of something better, that the days of war will someday cease. But at the same time, it underscores just how bad things are right now. And the right question for us to ask is, why do we have to wait? If God could just fix all of this right now, why doesn't he? There's another article in the paper this morning that reported that sales of the Bible are up 22% this year. 22%. Whereas the sales of every books overall was 1% this year. So the sale of Bibles has spiked. And the question the reporter asks is, well, why? And they actually went to the very same thing I'm talking about. Times are tough. Things are difficult. Locally, nationally, internationally. People are scared. And so they're turning to the Bible for a place to look, which is a great thing. And yet it's also a very challenging thing, because the Bible holds out promises like this, promises like the one we see here in Jeremiah 33. And frankly, it exacerbates this sense of paradox that we all live in. The story here, like I said, is roughly 600 years before Jesus. These were real people that God is speaking to, a real person named Jeremiah, who was a prophet. And in this sense, think of him as a preacher. He preached sermons. And Jeremiah was preaching a very unpopular sermon. It was actually a political sermon, which I'm hopefully not going to do today. But his was intentionally a political sermon, which was, Jerusalem is going to fall to the Babylonians. Now, that message had been preached by other prophets before. The difference with Jeremiah was that it was in the middle of happening. So at the time of this writing in Jeremiah 33, the city of Jerusalem was under siege. Now, there's not a lot of siege warfare that happens anymore. But in an ancient siege, basically the army surrounded the walled city and cut off the food and water supply and waited for everyone to die. It's gruesome. Jerusalem was under siege, and the king, Zedekiah, was in Jerusalem saying, we're going to survive, we're going to make it, we're the promised people. And Jeremiah was preaching, actually, no, we're not. And so where this passage finds us, first of all, is God's people being battered by the enemies. It's the story of Jerusalem at this time. People starving. In fact, Jeremiah wrote another book that's in our Old Testament. The book is called Lamentations. It's an extended poem on how bad it was in the city. And I say that the promise presents a paradox because it underscores how bad things are. Did you hear how the passage we started today? Verse 10, in this place of which you say it is a waste without humans or animals. Like, God is being upfront with the current situation. He is not painting a rosy picture and pretending like, hey, everything's just fine. In fact, if you read the whole of Jeremiah 33, beginning at the first verse, you realize that things are really bad in Jerusalem by this point. They have not yet been taken over by Babylon, but it's about to happen. And we ask, why doesn't God do something now? And our experience is, first, that we're battered by the enemies. But then the story here gets a little bit worse when you think about the story of Jeremiah, because not only was Jeremiah himself battered by the enemies, I mean, he was preaching an unpopular message, and even at one point he was like, God, I'm done. Like, I'm out. Like, I didn't ask for this. And God's like, no, you're going to keep speaking. And so he did. But at the beginning of, let me ask this. Do you know where Jeremiah was when he wrote this part? He was in prison. So at the beginning of Jeremiah chapter 32, The king had had enough of listening to Jeremiah. Jeremiah, like, you're ruining morale. Jeremiah's like, well, I mean, people are eating each other. That's kind of ruining morale. Like, okay, like, it's time for us to, like, say we're done. And Zedekiah's like, you're done, and he locked him in prison inside the king's house. So not only was Jeremiah experiencing the story of Jerusalem where they're being battered by their enemies, but secondly, he's experiencing imprisonment by his allies, by the people who should be on his side, hemmed in by his own. So Jeremiah is not just saying, well, all these people, just can't see God's promise. He's actually experiencing one worse. Not only is he without food, but he doesn't even have the freedom that the rest of the people have to move around the city. He's in jail. And on top of that, in chapter 32, God told him to do this crazy thing. He's like, call for your cousin. His cousin comes, and God's like, okay, I want you to buy a field from your cousin that's outside the city. Like, why, God? Because I've got a promise that this isn't the end of the story. So Jeremiah shells out his own cash while he's in prison to buy a field that he can't even see, and he's about to get taken away into captivity. So now he's got less money than he had before because God told him to do it. So this message that Jeremiah is proclaiming to other people, he's having to proclaim to himself. Like, God, I'm out a whole bunch of money on a field that I don't know if I'll ever see. And it makes us ask, why doesn't God do something now? But then our experience maybe hits rock bottom, not just when we're battered by enemies or when we're hemmed in by people who should be our friends, but when we experience being forsaken by God himself. Again, you can look earlier in chapter 33 here, where God says, I'm done. I'm out. You've rejected me long enough. I'm out. And you say, well, doesn't the Bible say I will never leave you? I will never forsake you? Yes, it does. But again, this is where I say we have to be realistic about what the scriptures actually teach. Like, it can be really exciting for those of us who are followers of Jesus to say, hey, sales of Bibles are up 22%. Let's go out there and bring everyone into the church. And yeah, we should do that. But then a lot of times the way we do it is we just sell all the positive stuff. Like, everything's going to be better if you follow Jesus. Is that true? Jeremiah followed Jesus right into prison. And if we're not honest with our friends who are asking questions about what the Bible teaches, all we do is we set the stage for them to sprout real quickly out of great excitement, but then when hard times come, they go, wait a second, I didn't know that I was in for this. What do you mean we have to wait? God is honest with them, we should be too. And if you're actually one of the folks who bought a Bible this year because you're looking for hope, you're so worried and concerned, I just want to say first of all, I'm really glad you joined us today. It's an honor for us to have you with us in your search for truth and for hope. And I just want to say, from the outset, God is not minimizing the problems of life. He's stating it right up front. He's not saying the things you're experiencing are just a figment of your imagination. There are philosophies and religions that would say that. God's like, no, things are really messed up. And they're not going to get fixed right now. And experiencing that seeming abandonment by God is not just the story of Jerusalem or the story of Jeremiah. Friends, frankly, it's a story of humanity itself. What Jerusalem was about to experience in Jeremiah 33 is what all human beings have experienced since the Garden of Eden, and that is exile. We were made to live on this earth. We were made to flourish here. We were made to do good for others. We were made to serve and bless and bring order to all that is in this world. Never since our first parents went their own way and forfeited the presence of God, we've been in exile ever since, looking for home, wandering, wondering, when will we return home? That's what drives us to break off one relationship and start another one. Maybe this is going to provide everything I want. It's what drives us to vote the way we do. Maybe they can fix things. It could be what drove you here this morning. Like, is there any answer for this longing I have inside? Because I've been wandering for so long. And I know it's not really helpful for me to say, yeah, and God says, wait. Welcome to the season of waiting. And it can lead some to say, well, if there's a paradox here between the promise of a hope on the one hand, the promise of something better on the one hand, and just how bad things are. Maybe I'll just pretend that those aren't real. Maybe I'll just deny one or the other. If you deny the one, that things could get better, you become a cynic. If you deny the other and how bad things really are, you live with rose-colored glasses, Pollyanna-ish, hopelessly optimistic and disconnected from reality. So God comes to us with a promise. And in this passage, the promise is right there in verse 14. Well, it's in verse 10, that this place as without waste will become a place of joy and gladness again. That humans and animals will be heard. That there will be weddings. That people will sing. That fortunes will be restored. And he said, well, when will all of this happen? It will happen, God says in verse 15. Verse 15. When a righteous branch springs up for David. David, whose family line is about to be cut off by Babylon, will have a branch spring out of it. And that branch is a person, the son of David, Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus came to give us his story. In fact, what he did is he took the story of Jerusalem and the story of Jeremiah and our story as human beings, and he embodied it in himself. God himself become flesh. God with a belly button. He took on human flesh so that he could identify with every aspect of our existence in this life. The sickness, the injury, the disappointment, the betrayal, everything you experience, Jesus took on himself so that no longer could anyone say, God just doesn't understand. No, God understands to the full because he experienced it in Jesus. And as the one who entered into the story of humanity, he too was hemmed in by those who should have been his friends. Who was it that imprisoned Jesus at his crucifixion? It wasn't the Roman authorities, it was his own people. Who was it that fled from him? It was his chosen disciples who scattered. He experienced and lived through the story of Jeremiah and the story of you and me in those moments where even those who should have loved us turned their back on us. And then he experienced the story of Jerusalem in his own body being battered by the enemies, by Roman soldiers who knew only violence, who were threatened with violence themselves if they did not inflict crucifixion on others. And Jesus in his body bore the story of our humanity. And ultimately from the cross, Jesus would himself experience forsakenness by God when he would say, "My God, why have you abandoned me?" You see, friends, God could have stepped in 600 years and snapped his fingers and sent Babylon away. I mean, he actually did it about 100 years earlier with the Assyrians in Jerusalem. He could have done it. He didn't. Why? Why wait? Because if he didn't wait, if we didn't wait, the Messiah wouldn't have come. And it wouldn't have just been Jerusalem that would be lost, but the entirety of the human race. But thankfully, friends, the story of Jesus does not end on a cross. Because on the third day, the stone was rolled away, and Jesus walked out. Alive again, the risen King. And he rose from the dead to break the hold that sin and death, what we ushered in by our own waywardness, Jesus rose from the dead to break the power of sin and death over all of us. And he did it in order to usher in the renewal of all things. Better for having been broken. I love this line from Leonard Cohen. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. See, we think, oh, it would have just been perfect if everything was always pristine, and yet somehow God, in his redeeming grace, makes things better for having been broken. He takes the shards of our lives and he picks up each one, and he graciously, in his time, mends them and makes them more beautiful than they ever were. You want to know one of the... Day after Thanksgiving, I took Kimberly and my parents-in-law and one of my kids to go see a building on the Upper East Side. It's a building I'm helping to build, believe it or not. They clearly, whoever picked me, did not have many options. But the organization I work for, we're building a space on the Upper East Side, and God willing, it'll be open January 1st. So, because I'm part of the committee, picking things, picking furniture, picking colors, all sorts of things, I can walk into the building and take a look. And so I took them the first time they'd seen it. And they've just done, the real builders have done an amazing job, the architects, it's fabulous. I'm so excited. My in-laws and daughter took a cab home because of my father-in-law's knee, and so Kimberly and I were walking back to the 6 train, and Kimberly said, all those years you were an executive pastor for a church down south leading a building program. And it was like, why? How did I go to seminary to do this? And she said, and here you are. And I said, and all those years I pastored on the Upper West Side in a 120-year-old building with heat that didn't work. You all know what that's like. And all the pain and all the tears and all the darkness and depression from those years. I said to Kimberly, I said, this shard too, this broken shard too, God has made beautiful in his time. Now, I would never have believed it in 2017. I wouldn't have believed that there's any way that God could have redeemed that. And yet, here's visible evidence that we just walked through. This, I think, may be the reason that the spirit that God gives to us is called the spirit of adoption. He's called an earnest, a down payment. I mean, can you imagine God being called a down payment? Like, isn't God the whole enchilada? Like, no, God's the down payment on everything else. It's part of the waiting. And no, I can't tell you why. I can't answer that question. I can't answer why it was 2024 that I see something broken in 2017 turned into something beautiful. There's plenty of other shards in my life that I look at and I'm like, I don't know what you're going to do with those, God. But this one's pretty cool, so I'll hold on to this for a little while. But I can tell you this. I can tell you that the way of Jesus leads ultimately and inevitably to resurrection. It always does. And I think in this life we experience thousands of little deaths and hopefully thousands of little resurrections. And someday when we experience death in full, we'll then experience the final resurrection and the renewal of all things. Friends, all that was lost will be restored. Not all at once, maybe in stages. Dad comes home from work. I'm like, okay, let's go. I gotta change. What? Change? You're fine, let's go. I'm gonna fulfill my promise. But let me do it at my time. It'll be more beautiful that way. That's what God invites us to follow with patience and with expectation that every good thing he said to you will, in fact, come to pass. Let's pray. God, we thank you that you hold out promises for us. It is better than we deserve. It's more than we could have asked for. And you've done it so that we might walk with hope, with patience, with courage, and also with humility. If everything went our way all the time, we would be insufferable. So thank you that you have better plans than we realize. But help us wait. And in the waiting, please season our waiting with a sense that you are near, that you are good, that you are for us. And give us eyes to look to Jesus and to follow his way until all things are renewed and every promise has come to pass. For we ask in his name, amen.